A lot of us have accepted the fact that we may never see a major gay character in a Pixar movie, one source says. Good. Doesn't belong in a kid's movie anyways. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Vince Salerno podcast. This is episode 85. As always, I'm your host, Vince Salerno, and we are back with just another news episode. As you can see, I am recording in my bedroom because my son is asleep in his room. And in case this is your first time tuning into the show, if you didn't know, my office where I typically record is right next to his room. So it's my room, and then the next wall, his room. And that wall is virtually paper thin, so it's very hard to record in that room with him asleep. So I just typically resort to recording in my bedroom and making it look as presentable as possible. You can probably see the curtains on the side, but we work with what we got. I mean, my son's sleep is much more important than this show anyways. So, all right, well, let's get into the show. We have a couple of fun and not so fun news stories to cover. Just a few things I wanted to go over that I found on Twitter, and then one big story that has been taking up social media discourse for a couple days now. But first, let's go through some sort of fun stories to talk about that I literally just came across today, actually. So first up, this is according to an article from Variety. I'm reading this from a tweet from Discussing Film. The Chosen, a series about the life of Jesus Christ, will be turned into a cinematic universe. And then they list four series that are in the works. A Joseph limited series, which I assuming is Saint Joseph. A 3-season Moses series. An Acts of the Apostles series, and a Jesus animated series that follows Jesus' interactions with children in the wild, starring Paul Walter Hauser. And again, this is part of a exclusive article from Variety. Dallas Jenkins, the creator and filmmaker behind The Chosen, launched 5 and 2 Studios to tell a new kind of Bible stories. According to 5-2 Studios' mission statement, the indie studio plans to produce Bible-inspired stories through unique, human, and authentic storytelling and audience engagement. Jenkins was set to announce the studio as his upcoming programming plans, as well as the rollout of the final 2 seasons of The Chosen. During this weekend's Chosen Con in Orlando, Florida. Wow, I didn't know that there was a con for Chosen. During this weekend's Chosen Con in Orlando, Florida, that 2-day gathering of fans featured cast members and producers behind the scenes about the life of Jesus, played by Jonathan Roumie, which began as a crowdfunding indie short in 2017, but has since become a global smash hit. I don't know which... okay, so they're on season 5, I believe. Season 6 will focus on the story of the crucifixion, and Season 7 will center on Jesus' resurrection. Both seasons will contain 8 episodes and will include a global theatrical release of the extended crucifixion and resurrection episodes. Wow, so that's exciting. I have not seen The Chosen yet. I've seen clips online, in particular of Jonathan Roumie's acting, and I think he's a phenomenal actor. I've seen him in more than just The Chosen. And yeah, he's got such great range, such a talented actor. I like this idea. I think, especially if you're planning to wrap up The Chosen story, which has been a excellent portrayal of the life of Jesus Christ, and you're thinking about telling other stories in the Bible, other figures in the Bible, I think that's phenomenal. Especially, I love Saint Joseph. I've consecrated myself to Saint Joseph numerous times. An incredible saint and an incredible man in his lifetime, and to this day, as a saint, he's still working wonders in people's lives, myself included. So to have a story focusing on him, hopefully highlighting just how significant of a figure he is in the church, in Christian history, would be wonderful. Especially when you consider, I mean, from the Catholic perspective, if you do the consecration of Saint Joseph, there is a litany that you pray to Saint Joseph, and it lists all the things that he is. He's the terror. I mean, the most common one is the terror of demons, protector of the Holy Church, foster father of the Son of God, the chaste guardian of the Virgin, or just the ones that come to mind. But it just, hopefully that highlights just how phenomenal and wonderful and incredible of a saint he is, and the fact that he was chosen among men to be the foster father of Jesus Christ. I mean, what an honor. What an honor. So that in particular excites me. We've seen many adaptations of the story of Moses, which is not really that exciting to me. I mean, the Prince of Egypt, how are you ever going to top the Prince of Egypt, honestly? But hey, if they can figure out a more biblically truthful way to tell that story, then more power to them. Let's see, the Acts of the Apostles, I think, would be a very interesting show, especially if that's going to be post-Chosen, and it's going to be, that might be the sequel series to Chosen, showing the apostles and their ministry before all their passings as martyrs. There's just like endless possibilities with the Chosen universe based on this plan that they have. I think the Paul Walter Hauser story is very interesting. I didn't know that he. I mean, the implication, if you're on board with these shows, especially with Dallas Jenkins and the crowd that these people associate themselves with, that you are at least Christian or Christian friendly. And so the fact that Paul Walter Hauser is involved is pretty cool. Again, he doesn't have to be Christian, doesn't even have to like Christians or whatever to want to be part of these stories, but the fact that he finds these stories compelling and wants to be part of the storytelling going on with Dallas Jenkins and the Chosen franchise is great. And Paul Walter Hauser's a great actor. He had like one line in Inside Out 2, but he was great in Inside Out 2. So yeah, this is very, very cool. I know cinematic universes can be a little tiring nowadays, but you know, as I always say, it's not the trends, it's the way the trends are used. If you're being very lazy and unintentional how you go about these things and how you tell these stories, yeah, people are going to get tired of these trends. But if you are highlighting and prioritizing good storytelling, it doesn't matter if you're making a superhero film, a Western, a biblical story like these, no matter what you're doing, as long as it's a good story, people are going to want to see your movie or TV show. It's not about trends. It's not about bouncing off of trends. And, you know, most studios, they just see something successful like the Avengers in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and think, well, cinematic universes are all the rage. We got to go do 1 billion cinematic universes across the landscape. They forget that the reason why the Marvel universe was so successful is because the Marvel universe was planned and methodically built out over years and carefully crafted. And a lot of these cinematic universes that try to launch and fail forget that. And so if this goes the way of the MCU rather than other cinematic universes, such as the Dark Universe, which never even got started, unfortunately, more power to them. I just think this is a great idea, and I'm very excited to see where it goes. So 2 other stories, one not so good depending on who you are. Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy's Star Wars film starring Daisy Ridley is reportedly on hold. This is from Cosmic Marvel on X or Twitter. The film needs more work and it likely won't begin filming until 2025. And this is via a report from Daniel RPK. This movie's been rife with controversy, we know. Mostly because of Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy and her comments regarding Star Wars and men directing Star Wars films and a woman's perspective and making men uncomfortable. Just things that you shouldn't be saying when you're wanting to create a film in a franchise that is meant to unite people. Star Wars is a story of everybody, of unity, of making everyone feel welcomed and not singling people out based on their political preferences or anything like that. This, in addition to the fact that people just aren't a fan of Rey, and that's not Daisy Ridley's fault. I think Daisy Ridley did the best she could with that role, but the character was poorly written and poorly disserviced by the studio, and this girl boss slant that they gave the character, especially after The Force Awakens, and really putting the male characters in a box that just didn't prioritize their story, especially Finn. Like, I think Finn was the most intriguing character in The Force Awakens, and by the time you get to The Last Jedi, he has nothing to do, and there's nothing interesting to do with the character, because everything interesting that could have happened to Finn is given to Rey, and he just becomes this. He just becomes a leftover of The Force Awakens that they don't know what to do with, which is probably why they almost killed him off in The Last Jedi, which is unfortunate to say, because I wanted to see what Finn would have done, and it really looked like Finn was going to be the Jedi. Heck, they both could have been the Jedi of that franchise. Why does it have to be one? Anyways, I shouldn't get on a tangent about the sequel trilogy, because we'll be here all day. But if this movie is not happening, I'm kind of glad, because no one wants to see it. I'm not particularly interested in seeing a movie from a person who says such hateful things. And again, we're seeing signs that the tide might be turning with Star Wars, which we've said for years that Kathleen Kennedy might be gone, things might be changing, and nothing's happened. But I think Kathleen Kennedy is trying to stay in power, and she is clinging on to every last hope she has to hold on to her power. But I think that time is coming to an end, and I think she will be gone sooner rather than later. As far as whether there will be anything to salvage after that remains to be seen. But I remain hopeful, as always. Last little story I wanted to cover. I thought this was really cool. So this is originally from a tweet from AP Entertainment, but this tweet I'm reading from is from Discussing Film. Colin Farrell says he watched Pixar films while filming The Penguin to escape the darkness. I watched Toy Story. I watched them all at the end of the working day for The Penguin, just for something light and beautiful. And the Associated Press Twitter for entertainment had a whole video on that, and I'll link that so you can check that out. But I think it's really cool. And I think that highlights something that should be talked about. With this conversation about method acting and like plunging into darkness and like embracing it for a role. I mean, the most obvious example is Heath Ledger's Joker, who sadly, because of the how dark he went with that role, ended up succumbing to that darkness and dying. I think that it's important, especially as an actor, to not be taken by that darkness, and because that darkness can lead you to despair. And it can be a horrible mindset to just place yourself in constantly. You have to be able to find a way to escape that and leave it behind you. And like letting a role take over you entirely. Because at the end of the day, you're acting. And at least in my opinion, I'm not a professionally trained actor or anything like that. But I've studied enough to know at least that like acting can be this all-encompassing thing. It should be, at least the best actors find a way to let a role healthily inhabit your physical and emotional state as far as getting into the character. And getting out of that is just as important as getting into that, especially if you're tackling something dark like something from the Batman universe, and especially as those films take a more realistic, gritty, and darker approach as the years go by. I I've heard stories of friends of mine who have taken very dark methods to get into roles, and seeing the impact it has on them, and it's very sad. And I know, especially as a director as well, like I have ideas and stories that I want to tackle that are not necessarily pleasant, and there's dark stuff that I want to deal with. Not because it's particularly pleasant, but because I think it's important and it's right for the story. And I certainly have plans to, when I get so lucky enough to tell these stories, and needing an escape from that on a daily basis after a long day of shooting, I would certainly love to turn on Toy Story, one of my all-time favorite movie, and just not just be escape the darkness that I am trying to portray on screen, but be able to see something that inspires me, and what was the initial original inspiration for me getting into this and wanting to make movies and talk about movies, and primarily make movies. And I thought it was particularly coincidental that Colin Farrell chose Pixar movies, because that's exactly what I would do in that situation. Pixar is not only just a wealth of creativity and inspiration, but they are some of my all-time favorite movies, and I just find it cool that Colin Farrell seems to think so as well. So that's just a fun little story I wanted to tackle. Yeah, I like that. That's good. More of that. Again, check out the video in the link of this episode if you want to see the full thing. Okay, let's get into our main story today. This might not be a long episode. So over the past week, there was a story circulating that Pixar's production of Inside Out 2 was riddled with problems and controversy. I don't know too much about this, and we're going to read the original article, at least what I think is the original article. I think it was from IGN, detailing mandates from the higher-ups at Disney and Pixar, employees being overworked, underpaid, and then let go, which adds up to a lot of stuff that other people have reported on and I've covered on this channel. So I think I'd like to connect the dots on all these things, because I think if you look at it all, I think it paints a very obvious picture of what's going on. So I'm going to pull up the IGN article, and we're going to dig into this. So let's do it. All right, so here is the original article, I believe. This is from IGN. Inside Out 2 was the hit Pixar needed, but the laid-off employees who crushed it are still hurting. 10 former employees talk about the pains of this year's layoffs, the pressure surrounding Inside Out 2, that surrounded Inside Out 2, and the large cultural concerns at the studio, which we'll see exactly what that means. Of course, they have fear, sadness, and anxiety in the graphic, because I guess it's the personification of the pain that these employees went through. Okay, from the outside, Pixar's narrative is a clear story of redemption. After the undeniable tough few years, battered by COVID-19, theater shutdowns, 2 Hollywood strikes, and a couple of box office disappointments, not to mention wokeness, of course they'll never admit that, the studio needed a win, and that win was Inside Out 2. The sequel to Pete Docter's Oscar-winning 2015 blockbuster is Pixar's highest hit in years. Biggest hit in years. And it's not even close. Inside Out 2 isn't just Pixar's highest-grossing film, it's the highest-grossing animated movie of all time. Which surprised me, because I don't think Inside Out 2 was anywhere near worthy of that title. But it's a good movie, and it's a fun movie, and who am I to say what deserves to make money? As long as it's not woke and horrible. And it wasn't, thankfully. But according to this article, it almost was. So let's see. 1.6 billion worldwide at the box office, stunning turn of events, yada, 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 yada. But for many of the workers behind Inside Out 2, its record-shattering success is more than a little bittersweet. As reports earlier this year, the studio began layoffs affecting 175 workers, or 14% of its staff, in May. And not only are layoff employees unable to benefit from the bonus of Inside Out 2's success, some are also recovering from what several sources describe as unprecedented crunch surrounding Inside Out 2. There was just an incredible amount of people who are like, I can't do this anymore. Oh boy. I think for a month or two, the animators were working 7 days a week, one source says. Ridiculous amount of production workers. Just people being tossed into jobs they'd never really done before. It was horrendous. IGN spoke to... Okay, this is the original article. Perfect. IGN spoke to 10 former Pixar employees from this story under conditions of anonymity, of course. They go into detail about the pains of the layoffs, financial struggles those layoffs have left them with, and the details behind what one source calls the largest crunch in the studio's history. It's a claim, well, you're talking about that up against Toy Story 2. So, I wonder. It's a claim disputed by a senior. Oh, sorry, there's a... It's a claim disputed by a senior executive at Pixar who tells IGN that the crunch at the end of Inside Out 2 is no different from those of many other films from the studio. But the fact remains, there are many who felt like they rushed to give Pixar the hit it so desperately needed, and were hung out to dry. I would venture that at least 95% of the people that got laid off are financially effed right now, one person says. Outside the financial strain of it all, sources also paint a picture of a studio that's terrified to rock the boat, with some internally pushing to avoid LGBTQ themes requiring Inside Out 2 edits. They've been rocking the boat since... When did Lightyear come out? 2022? Even before then, Luca was heavily inferring a same-sex relationship between Luca and Alberto. So don't tell me that they avoided rocking the boat. They've been rocking the boat for years. What are you talking about? Okay, that's my first issue with this. It's a studio, they say, that's overly reliant on Chief Creative Officer Pete Docter, stubbornly set in his ways. He's been at Pixar for years, and he knows the formula to success better than anyone, excluding other senior animators and directors at Pixar. What are you talking about? And setting its remaining team up for more crunch in its future films. Okay, it's called an overhaul. I am assuming a lot of these movies took a lot of liberties with LGBTQ themes, and as those have been deemed controversial by a lot of people, Pixar is probably trying to avoid that. But these are probably people who are pro-LGBTQ as far as those themes and all that, and pro-wokeness. So they see this as a loss, even though they've been sitting pretty for years with gay characters infiltrating these movies. The internal culture of Pixar right now is really rough, one former employee says. There is just an incredible amount of people who are like, I can't do this anymore. Disney declined to comment for this story. Like much of Hollywood, Pixar was massively affected by the COVID-19 lockdowns that hit movie theaters in March 2020. The last Pixar movie to be released theatrically before lockdowns was Onward on March 6th, though it would be made available on Disney Plus and demand just a couple weeks later after lockdowns. I remember that was the last movie that I saw in the theater. I took my brother to go see it, and then literally 2 weeks later, maybe a week later, I don't remember, something around that time, then yeah, lockdowns began. I was like, oh my gosh. Crazy. The next 3 Pixar movies after Soul, Luca, Turning Red were all released directly on Disney+, skipping theatrical runs entirely with the exception of a few international territories. Disney Pixar was far from alone in these pains. Even major studios struggled again. Yeah, we know, COVID hit everyone hard. Pixar returned to big screen wasn't the financial. Lightyear was a well-publicized disappointment, closing at its box office run with just $226 million worldwide. Elemental did end up faring better with nearly $500 million worldwide. Had to rebound from what Pixar president Jim Morris admitted was a disappointing opening, with just $29.5 million domestically. According to one source, due to the profit-sharing model at Disney Pixar, the movie has to cross $600 million to be considered profitable for Pixar. It's not even seen as a true hit until it crosses until that coveted $1 billion mark. Well, we're not in those times anymore, so you might want to adjust your numbers. We are not in those times anymore. It all led to a situation where Inside Out 2, a sequel to arguably one of the most beloved animated movies ever, I would agree with that, was seen as the film that could reverse the studio's fortunes, making it what one source called an all-hands-on-deck studio emergency. Agreed. Absolutely. It's a slam dunk to make Inside Out 2, and if you had people inserting woke ideas and ideologies into a movie that should hit the masses, then you should absolutely get all hands on deck to make it what it needs to be. It was rare, we're told, to find someone who worked at Pixar in the past couple of years who didn't contribute to Inside Out 2. One source points out that the credits for Inside Out 2 are longer than any other Pixar movie, given the amount of studio workers who were pulled in on it. Even now, I think people are going to still feel that pressure of like, oh my gosh, we did it. We did it. Okay. Some go so far to say they believe Pixar would fall apart if Inside Out 2 wasn't a runaway success. It was seen by many employees as a life or death situation for the studio. Well, but given the box office take, I'm sure that most everyone's happy, besides these canned employees. That was the pressure felt by everybody. One source said, we needed this movie to be a success because we won't have a studio otherwise. And that is the pressure that everybody felt the whole time. And that is the pressure that everybody felt the whole time. Even now, I think people are gone still feeling that pressure, like, oh my gosh, we did it. Whether or not Pixar was actually in danger isn't confirmed, but a Time magazine interview just before the release of Inside Out 2, that Docter said, if this doesn't do well at the theater, I think it just means we're going to have to think even more radically about how we run this business. While Docter is publicly an executive producer on Inside Out 2, multiple sources say that he stepped in as uncredited co-director, working heavily alongside credited director Kelsey Mann. In some ways, that move made sense to many. Docter, after all, co-wrote and directed the first Inside Out, in addition to boasting directing and story credits on beloved Pixar movies like Up, WALL-E, and Toy Story. I mean, you saw the end result of that. Inside Out 2 made $1 billion at the box, that was one person says of Docter taking on the larger role. That was a direct result of Pete's involvement. Pete is a genius. Nobody can dispute this. Well, at least someone's speaking well about Pete Docter. That's weird that you have one person speaking positively about Pete Docter, another person saying his inability to keep things running as they were at Pixar because it's not like his... It's just ridiculous. He's a veteran. He knows how to run things. They've been making successful movies up until debatably 2011. So I don't know what to say about that. That's weird. Many of the sources IGN spoke to generally don't have any particularly negative feelings towards Docter. Okay, well, that's good. Maybe I'm being proven wrong here. All right. It's well known that after all these years and a proven track record, he knows what he's doing, but also indicative of what some sources say is a godlike worship of the man in charge, a holdover from the days of ousted Chief Creative Officer John Lasseter. Okay, are we going back to white guy is hugging people too closely and he needs to be fired? We're not going back to that, are we? Godlike worship of the man in charge, a holdover from the days of ousted... What does that mean? What are we trying to imply? That because Pete Docter has a proven track record and knows how Pixar is supposed to run, that's a holdover from days from dark days? Docter is a genius. Docter is one of the few veterans who's willing to stick around because you ousted John Lasseter. Brad Bird won't come near you unless I don't know how they coaxed him in to do Incredibles 3, but he won't come near Disney Pixar anymore. Lee Unkrich left. Josh Cooley's working on Transformers now. Like Andrew Stanton is coming back to do Toy Story 5, thankfully. But how many of these original creators are sticking around? Of course they're going to rely on Pete Docter. What a ridiculous thing to say. Godlike worship. How about proven track record? There's just a lot of mixed signals going on here, and it's really weird. One source says the studio leans on Docter to an unhealthy degree, and it's partially what led to a situation like The Crunch and Inside Out 2. Now, I guess if you're not putting trust wholly in your director and you need Docter to come in and hold your hand, yeah, then maybe you shouldn't have ousted John Lasseter without any real evidence and let him go to Skydance and do his thing, which is debatable whether that's a success or not. You cannot do anything without Pete, literally nothing, one former employee says, and that creates a bottleneck. For many, it's also a symbol of Pixar holding fast to an internal culture that's stubbornly set in its ways. Set in its ways of what? They've had a proven track record of success for years before this woke crap started happening. So what are you talking about? Set in its ways were working before this woke mind virus took over everything. Again, this is like hypocritical talk from these employees and from this article is really frustrating. With an aversion to bringing on new directors and voices, not true. Many new directors have been coming in. One source cited a period of time between 2020 and the release of Lightyear where the studio was more open to bringing in producers and creatives from outside typical ranks, as well as greener filmmakers. I'm not sure what that means. That brief period of willingness to experiment, however, didn't last, particularly after Lightyear's financial failure, sources say. Pixar lost the desire to take risks, either in its creative appointments or in its story decisions. As reported at the time, there were many reasons why Lightyear is disappointing at the box office: a confusing spin-off concept, a new Buzz Lightyear voice, growing pains going from Disney Plus back to theatrical. Docter even admitted that it prompted a lot of soul-searching at the studio, citing some of Lightyear's conceptual and character issues. Yeah. But also, the experimental stuff was inherently, like, LGBTQ coded. So that's something audiences clearly rejected. Of course, people like IGN and other Hollywood back pocket people will not admit, but that's part of the reason. And no one is willing to admit that, but we'll see. This article is still young. Maybe they'll say something. But multiple sources say that Disney's leadership internally put a large part of the blame on Lightyear's financial failure on a same-sex kiss in the film, which was briefly removed, then reinstated after an internal staff uproar. In a joint statement to Walt Disney Company leadership, LGBTQ workers and allies at Pixar said leadership was censoring overtly gay affection at a time where employees were also protesting the company's response to the Florida's Don't Say Gay bill, which is not what it was called. It's not a Don't Say Gay bill. It's ridiculous that they're still calling it that. Wow. It's so funny how things go from Disney making a good decision to employees complaining, making a bad decision, and then letting that bad decision affect the box office, because I'm sure Lightyear would have been much more profitable if that didn't happen. There are actually a lot more issues with Lightyear besides the gay kiss. I won't go into all of them right now, but it is a movie riddled with issues, I will admit. But it would have at least been a little more well-received if that same-sex kiss was not in there. And that was primarily why a lot of people, including myself, did not go see it in theaters. So at least Disney is admitting blame on that part, primarily. Because they're right to admit that that was what really tanked that movie. And if there was something in Inside Out 2 that was supposed to be removed, that they did end up removing, good on them. And if these employees are talking out in anger because of that, that'll be interesting. And again, I'm let's see if that's even mentioned in this at all. Quote, "It is, as far as I know, still a thing where leadership, they'll bring up Lightyear specifically and say, oh, Lightyear was a financial failure because it had a queer kiss in it." True, one source tells IGN. That's not the reason the movie failed. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Again, there's multiple reasons why that movie failed, but yes, the gay kiss is one of the big reasons why so many people opted out of seeing Lightyear. It doesn't matter if you are pro-LGBTQ or not. People clearly did not like that. They didn't like this stuff in children's content, in children's movies and TV shows. That's the issue. That is the issue. Now, Docter largely uses the language of making universal stories, which to him means something that is very homogenous, that can relate to anyone. That anyone can relate to, one source says. That's great. That is why Pixar had a proven track record. That's why Pete Docter has a proven track record, because of that. Universal storytelling. Everything from up to, let's say, Onward. Universal storytelling. I mean, besides the one gay, one-eyed girl that randomly talked about a girlfriend, which was so weird and out of place. Other than that, I guess you can consider Onward a universal story, because I really liked Onward besides that one little scene. But that's what makes Pixar universally beloved. That is why these stories, Toy Story, WALL-E, Monsters Incorporated, Finding Nemo, Incredibles, Up, all these stories have stood the test of time and considered some of the greatest stories of all time. That's why Colin Farrell is watching them at the end of shooting The Penguin. Because they're universal because they are universal stories that people love. That speaks to all people, no matter what your religion, no matter what your race, no matter what your sexual preference. It's for everyone. And it doesn't single out, call out, or reject anybody in the way that some of these movies have. The apparent hesitation to touch on LGBTQ themed storylines in particular affected Inside Out 2's development. Oh, okay, I might be an oracle here. According to several of our sources, multiple people recall hearing about continuous notes making Riley, the main character of both movies, come out as less gay, leading to numerous edits that ramped up around September 2023 after the resolution on the WGA strike. Sources describe rumors that there was special care put into making the relationship between Riley and Val, a supporting character in Inside Out 2, seem as platonic as possible. Good. Even requiring edits to the lighting and the tone of certain scenes to remove any trace of romantic chemistry. One source describes it as just doing a lot of extra work to make sure that no one would potentially see them as not straight. Okay, so I guess this isn't really clear if this was an implied It's not really clear if this is an implied gay relationship or if Riley was going to come out as gay in the movie. But it seems like this was a something Pixar put a lot of effort into. Good on them, because that stuff does not belong in children's content. And the fact that Disney had the balls to say, no, we're not doing this, make sure there's not even a trace of a chance that people can misconstrue this, is phenomenal. Good on them. This is what will get people back in the theaters, knowing that this agenda is not being prioritized. And that people can walk into Inside Out 2 not having to worry about this. That's why this movie was successful. People love these characters, and they want to see them. They want to watch these movies. But the fact that they're able to walk into Inside Out 2 and not have to have this stuff shoved down their throats in a children's movie and worry about their kids learning about things they either don't want them to learn about or aren't ready to teach them about, because we're at a point now where we can't avoid these things. We have to teach our kids about these things, unfortunately, but not by people who are going to manipulate the narrative. This is good. This is what I want to see more of from Disney. Good on them. It's worth noting that Pixar released a short film in 2015 that followed Riley's first date with a boy. Still, many fans online started to call out queer coding in Inside Out 2. From the moment the first trailer arrived, Inside Out 2 spoilers to follow. The movie also teased a deep, dark secret that Riley was harboring throughout, only to reveal it in the post-credits scene that the secret was that she once burned a hole in the carpet. Many fans, however, thought the reveal would be that Riley was actually grappling with her sexuality, even felt baited over what it actually was. Really? I didn't. That did not cross my mind when watching the movie. That did not come across at all. And I did think, okay, they already established Riley is straight because she's boy crazy and not boy crazy. Well, no, yeah, she's boy crazy. She has a perfect boyfriend that she imagines in her head, and of course she's not gay. Mind you, Riley is not canonically gay, one source says. In the film, what you saw, nothing about Riley says that she is gay, but it's kind of inferred based on certain contexts. No, I don't want to see this. I don't want inferences that she could be gay. Keep that out of this stuff. Keep that out of kids' content. Again, I can't say that enough. And so that is something that they tried to play down multiple points. Good. Another source calls some leadership comfortable with queer themes at large, and the insistence on keeping those themes out of Inside Out 2 was a big thing throughout the development. Yes. I've already said, I'm not going to keep repeating this point, but yes. Good on Disney. Keep this stuff out of everything you make because it is not for kids. It's not for kids. All of this, the pressure, the creative bottlenecks, the story hesitations, led to a rush in the last few months of production on Inside Out 2. Former employees say, or as one source puts it, it was a crap show. Part of the issue for those who worked on Inside Out 2, sources say, was a new internal methodology that Pixar leadership called the long and lean. A workflow that was, in theory, supposed to give the studio a longer runway to finish the project, but with less staff. Some sources felt it mostly gives the creative leads more time with the material, while roles like editors and artists are left to pick up the slack. Elio, too, is hard to separate from the story surrounding Inside Out 2. The upcoming sci-fi film was originally slated to release on March 1st, 2024. Oh, cool. We're talking about Elio. Interesting. But it was delayed to June 13th, 2025 last fall. In a recent interview with The Wrap, which also quietly revealed that Madeline Sharafian and Domi Shi would be taking over the directing duties from Adrian Molina. Docter said the delay was largely due to the actors' strike, but several IGN sources say that it was also due to major story changes, leading to a grind on that film even before many of its artists were moved to work on Inside Out 2. And this is confirmed because there was a trailer shown at D23 which features a different tone for Elio, and I believe that Elio's mother was replaced with Elio's aunt, and the voice actress was switched from America Ferrera to Zoe Saldana. There's a lot of changes in in Elio, and that trailer leaked online, so you can see how very different this movie is going to be from its original inception. One source who had pleasant experience on their prior projects reported feeling a marked shift when they were on Elio. It was rushed work, paranoid leadership, mixed messaging, sources say. You're just working 24/7, and so after a while, your body just starts to break down. And that's not good. This got to the point where some had to wait so long, while others crunched, one source says. The visual effects artists were starting their shots when the shots weren't even fully animated. It's a practice that's referred to as working dirty, essentially, doing a large chunk of work ahead of time that you know will be thrown out on the off chance that it will be used. Still, others are willing to give Pixar itself credit. Those who crunched were paid overtime and and workers were offered time off in return, although it could be hard to find the time in production schedules to take it. But sources say even with solid benefits and well-meaning team leaders, the production structure in place and the demands to meet the release timeline makes for an untenable situation. They do care for us when we do have aches and pains, one source says of Pixar. They throw everything at us to try and help. That's really great. There's really great health benefits, mental health, so it's not like they're not trying and they're not offering things. But at the end of the day, I feel like the expectation is that let's just crunch and get it done. But then it goes on for months and months and months, and it's not sustainable. Others worry that due to Inside Out 2's success, Pixar won't have any motivation to change its bottleneck system. One recalls a recent company meeting where, citing Inside Out 2's victory, Docter essentially expressed that they would replicate this system with Elio. Again, another movie that's rife in changes right now, so I guess that makes sense, but I don't think that's going to be the norm. I hope not after this, at least. I think people just kind of were like, really? One source says, you kind of killed everybody on Inside Out, and now you're going to want to do that again with Elio? Okay, this is a very long article, so I'm just going to try to skim through it so we can get through to the end. And while not everyone crunched on Inside Out 2, what struck many of our sources is how many people who did were affected by last year's layoffs. Or layoffs earlier this year, excuse me. At the very least, the fact that Pixar was having layoffs at some point wasn't a huge shock to the staff. Employees were told layoffs would be happening at some point in January 2023, and Disney announced a strategic realignment in May that would have included layoffs of 7,000 from the company at large. 75 Pixar employees were laid off in June of that year. Those layoffs included Lightyear director Angus MacLane. Oh gosh, I didn't know he was laid off. I mean, he made a bad movie, but he's still a Pixar veteran. Really weird. And of course, Galen Sussman, the producer who became famous for saving Toy Story 2 after it was accidentally deleted from Disney's servers. Okay, did you know that the version of Toy Story 2 she saves is actually not the version that we saw? It was a completely different version. It was some of the same characters, but it was apparently not the same movie. It's a very fascinating story. Not discrediting anything she did for Pixar. Obviously, she saved them during a massive crunch, but it's an interesting story. You should check it out. Some sources expected more layoffs in September 2023, but theorized that those layoffs were pushed back due to the amount of work that still needed to be done on Inside Out 2 after the summer strikes. Quote, for a good year and a half, everyone was on edge, one source said. I think that's maybe why they had their heads down and just worked as hard as they could. Instead, the layoffs of 14% of Pixar's workforce began in late May, after much of the work on Inside Out 2 was complete. The layoffs, Docter said in a recent interview with the Ankler, were another thing that made this year really weird. Unfortunately, now Disney has come to the point where they realized, you know what, the amount we have to spend to do the quality we do doesn't make sense. Interesting comment. Again, if the employees that were laid off were all the wokies who were ruining Pixar, I don't like seeing anyone lose their job, no matter what they're doing, but unless they deserve it. But these people were just of the wrong ideology, and I'm sure they will have no problem finding work. Of course, that doesn't take away from some of the hurt that comes with losing your job and being ousted by Pixar, of all places. I can't imagine, but still, if they were part of this, they were part of this big push to get all the woke people out of Disney. More power to them, I think. The day that the layoffs happened was like a funeral. There was a weeping and crying in the atrium. Again, horrible. Like I don't rejoice in people losing their jobs. But if these people were contributing to the wokeness and pushing these messages onto children, I don't want these people working for Disney and trying to push this stuff onto children. That's not right. That's demonic. It's demonic stuff. One person even points out the irony of working on a movie about mental health only to have their health insurance and thus their therapy and other mental health benefits stripped away because they were let go, not because they didn't offer them, as the article pointed out. That's interesting. Some can't even bring themselves to see Inside Out 2, knowing how many of Pixar's former employees are struggling to get by. There's a painful irony, sources say, in the conversation had in the wake of the layoffs. While some are thrilled to have their names attached to the highest grossing animated film in history, they're juggling those feelings with not knowing how they'll pay their bills next month. Many laid-off employees, sources say, have resorted to moving out of Emeryville areas as they navigate their next move. Well, California is a crap show, so it's no surprise that people are struggling with the cost of living in that city. It's a situation where Inside Out 2's focus on grappling with various conflicting emotions is unfortunately fitting. Just to watch that movie do so well in theaters, it's great, one former employee says. I'm really happy for a lot of us at Pixar that want to see that. But for those who got laid off, it's really bad for some of us who just don't know what we're going to do now. A lot of us accepted the fact that we may never see a major gay character in a Pixar movie. Good. Great. I love that. Sorry. No, I'm not sorry, actually. I was a fan before I worked there, so it's really hard to see how sausage gets made, and now it will be like, oh, can I ever just be a fan again? I don't know, adds another. Others have concerns about the culture at Pixar and storytelling. They're leaning more towards universal story directive, especially with the apparent aversion to LGBTQ themes. A lot of us have accepted the fact that we may never see a major gay character in a Pixar movie, one source says. Good. Doesn't belong in a kid's movie anyways. But at the heart of it, many of these sources IGN spoke to are just worried about the future of a studio many of them grew up idolizing and the employees that are still left there. Multiple sources say there is a particularly low morale among remaining employees, especially as more work on Elio blooms. Pixar, they argue, has taken all the wrong lessons from Inside Out 2's blockbuster success, all the while being set in unsustainable work process. One person called studio rudderless, saying it got very lucky in Inside Out 2. They learned nothing. And the feedbacks I'm still getting when I'm just reaching out for current employees, another source says, right now everyone's on Elio. Things are exactly the same how they were before, and everyone's working crazy hours to get Elio fixed. Again, fixed. People not realize the cultural shift going on right now. It does not excuse like the overworking and the unfortunate situation financially that people are in, but you're fixing a crap show. I think the biggest feeling that I heard around the studio before the layoffs and now even post-layoffs, talking to people who are still there, is everybody feels like the executives are just acting in a fear-based way. Other adds, everything is to preserve their own power in their own jobs. So I think morale is really low because people no longer trust that they're being led with the best interest at heart. I mean, that's up for debate, but if you're lumping Pete Docter into that, I don't know. He seems to be making good moves. If there are any silver linings to be had, some say they're still fans of the studio because of the friends they still have there, who pour their hearts into the work. Some stress again that their resentment don't even lie with Docter or Morris in particular, whose hands are likely tied in a lot more problems. Okay, I shouldn't be saying that then. I'm glad people at least have sympathy for Docter because he is proven man. But then again, the people say like, oh, well, he's still stuck in his old ways of proven success again, which is frustrating that people are even questioning that. But still, as Inside Out 2 heads for even more visibility on Disney Plus later this month, something of a call for justice for those who were laid off remains. Quote, we love to tell stories, that's our career, but when your work is put out there, you kind of want to benefit from that strength of that. So one source says, people need to be compensated for that. All right, and that's it. All right, so let's wrap this up. I'm not going to say what Pixar employees deserve financially or anything like that. If they were truly wronged in any way, then maybe, but I don't know numbers. I don't know what they deserve or don't deserve. I'm not going to comment on that. I am going to comment on the number of employees who say that we should be mourning or worried about the culture of Pixar because of the lack of LGBTQ themes. And mourning that we're never going to see another gay character in a Pixar movie, or the first queer transgender character, or whatever. That is not anything to mourn. I know these people will never understand that, but I find it frustrating that a lot of these people seem to want to mourn and take issue with universal storytelling being the central focus of Pixar going forward. That is a good thing. They seem to not equate the fact that the universal storytelling model that they embraced, which just was normal storytelling, was why we have such beloved brands and franchises and movies from that studio. To imply that we need that embracing specific agendas, personal agendas, was a good thing for Pixar when it's been proven to be the thing that, one of the many things, and in my opinion, the central thing that tanked them at the box office and culturally, is ridiculous. And I'm sure they're never going to admit this, but it is nothing to mourn. There's nothing to be mournful about. That element may be gone from Pixar, and they're moving towards universal storytelling. If the culture gets back to, if Pixar gets back to just telling good stories, that is something to be very, very positive, optimistic, and happy about. And I, for one, am looking forward to seeing more Pixar films in the theater that will hopefully embrace universal storytelling over overt and subjective LGBTQ themes, which should not be marketed towards children. End of story. So as far as financial compensation for these employees, we'll see what happens. As far as justice for these employees, we'll see what happens. But I am not crying over the loss of LGBTQ themes at Pixar and Disney overall, if that's truly the way we're going. Again, if you're seeing shows like Agatha, which is marketed as like the gayest show on television, do not think that Disney doesn't know what's going on right now. I'm not saying Disney is the most pure, chaste, and holy company of them all, but they do see what's going on. And I've been hearing from inside that they know that people don't like this stuff, and they are trying to push away from it. Agatha was shot years ago. They needed to just get it out there and be done with it. Same with The Acolyte. Acolyte was never going to get a season 2, I guarantee you. And neither is Agatha. These shows are not being released because they know people want to see them. They release them because they need to get them out. They need to clean the gutter. They need to clean house. That's why you're getting Toy Story 5. That's why you're getting Frozen 3 and 4. That's why you're getting Zootopia 2. That's why you're getting these safe bets. Because Disney knows that those are going to be moneymakers, and they're going to get back on track. That's why Inside Out 2 was so important, in my opinion, for Pixar. They needed to make it a safe movie for everyone, universal audiences to enjoy, and that's why that movie was the highest grossing animated movie of all time. That is why. And the more Pixar and Disney get with that message, the better things are going to be for them. I guarantee it. Guarantee it. So this went longer than I expected, but that's all I had to say. So thank you guys for tuning into today's episode of the Vince Salerno podcast. If you like this episode, give it a like, give it a share, subscribe to this channel. We can check out other episodes of the Vince Salerno podcast, as well as trailer reactions and shorts and stuff like that. I've been doing a lot of those recently. And if you like that, check it out. If you're an audio person, check it out on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. I will see you guys next time. Have a fantastic day. God bless, and peace out.